Today and tomorrow, we'll be covering brain-computer interfaces. Today, we will cover the neuroscience side of it, and tomorrow we'll cover actual programming side of it. But basically, just briefly, brain-computer interfaces are any kind of device or method that allows us to actually measure what's going on in our brain and somehow use that in a computer program, maybe to move a prosthetic like robot arm, or to type text through it, or to just figure out what a person is feeling or thinking and then respond to it, or anything like that. There are multiple ways that this can be done. I mean, this can also be done just to find the activity level of certain brain area for a disease or something. But so generally, there are many different approaches to it. They all revolve around the idea of treating brain as a device from which we can take information and do something with it. Now, most of the time, we'll be dealing with this particular device. This is called a neurostic crown. It's a type of an EEG. We'll see what EEG is in a moment. But basically, a human puts this on his head or her head, and this device with the electrodes, so these things, measures the brain activity, and from that figures out what you are thinking or what you're feeling or how focused or distracted you are or how calm you are or how anxious you are. And then you can use those measurements to change music or send a message or do some things. We'll see exactly what we can do with them and how in our Python code tomorrow. But today I want to discuss what kinds of brain-computer interfaces exist, how they work, in what way they are different, and just all the relevant knowledge around it. So as always, feel free to ask me any questions you get. And yeah, let's get to it. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Good. So let's start our today's discussion of looking into the brain, the techniques for it, the trade-offs for each technique, why multiple of them exist instead of just one, why one isn't always the best, and yeah, just everything about them. So how might we look inside the brain? So first of all, at first this might seem like a strange idea because we're used to thinking that our brains are some kind of black box, non-material things. I mean, brains are material, but that our mind is non-material, that our thoughts are not something we can directly measure. But turns out this is not true. So previously we covered synapses, we covered neurotransmitters, and now we need to take a step back and realize everything we do, humans, like every thought we have, every emotion we feel, even every movement we plan or every sentence we plan or just everything we do, we think, we feel, or anything happens by our neurons sending signals to each other. This means that in principle, there is a structure in our brain which we can figure out even before waiting for us to speak or to do things. Because if you think about it structurally, we have some sensory neurons that take information from the outside world, like the neurons in our eyes, on our skin, in our ears, and such. We have motor neurons which instruct our hand to move or instruct our mouth to say certain words or our eyes to blink and such. And everything else in between is interneurons which basically do a form of computation to figure out what movements to do or what words to say, which is also a kind of movement. And it used to be that the only way humans interacted with the outside world was through their muscles. So through their muscles of motion and muscles of speech. But now that doesn't have to be the case anymore, because now we can use the devices to look straight inside our brain, look at our interneurons, which is mostly neurons in our head, and figure out our thoughts, our feelings, and such straight from there, which would be much faster. And it would also allow us to get to things that we cannot really properly articulate in words, or to get to patients who maybe cannot speak, or maybe cannot move at all, or are otherwise limited. So potentially this can be used to either help someone with recovery, at least recovering the ability to communicate, maybe even recovering emotion. And also it can be used to augment the regular human behavior, human nature, even you could say. And we'll get into each of those in a moment. So let's get to it. There's a couple of ways that this can be done. As you can see on the image, there are multiple ways, and in the two main factors by which they differ is, first of all, how invasive they are. Invasive means like, uh, is it something that I can just put on and remove, or do I have to drill my skull and put it inside my brain? Because if you think about it logically, like if you drill your skull and go inside your brain, you'll get a much more clear signal because now your neuron activity doesn't have to go through the skull and outside of your head. You can measure it directly where it's happening. But obviously, there's more risk of infection. It's more uncomfortable to have a wire plugged into your brain, and it's just more limited. That's not something you can casually do for a million people. But if it's something non-invasive, meaning it doesn't penetrate your head, it's just like a headphone that you can put on and take off, then it's a lot more comfortable, a lot cheaper, doesn't require as much medical licensing or anything, and also just people are more likely to agree to it because it's less of a spooky thing
I have
to
a
do.
question.
Yeah.
So you put it on your head, right? I mean, how do you see the results? Is it connected to a device or computer?
Yeah, so this one, like it depends on the device, but like this one specifically, yeah, it has a built-in chip which processes the data, and then over Bluetooth or over Wi-Fi, it can send this data to your computer. And then on your computer, you can say that, oh, I was thinking about moving my right hand, so let's click W on my keyboard or something like that. So the idea is, yeah, through Bluetooth or through Wi-Fi, it sends these signals to your computer, and then you can do whatever you want with those signals.
Okay, thank you.
Like, yeah, thanks for asking. And so, yeah, basically, same as how you would use a keyboard or a mouse or a microphone to basically send data to your computer to then do something with that. With this device, also, you measure your brain activity, and then you use it to, yeah, do something in your computer. That's the idea. And thanks for asking that. And everyone, also, if there's anything you are not completely certain about, please feel free to ask. And yeah, so let me just repeat what I was saying. So there's different levels of invasiveness. Like the top ones here are less invasive because they're just devices where you put your head in there and then you put it out. Then the second ones here, ECOG, endovascular, and FUS, are semi-invasive, which means that you take off your skull, but you don't go inside your brain, you go on the surface of your brain. And then there are kinds of devices like these ones that we'll get into in a second, which go inside your brain, like they penetrate even your brain tissue, which can even be damaging, but they can do even more level of detail. So depending on what we want, how much detail we need, how much resolution we require based on our task. We can either do away with something as comfortable as a headset, or we might have to literally drill our skull to put a chip in. Okay. So let's talk about a bunch of ways to measure brain activity. And on this image, you can see where each of them roughly go. So first of all, let's start with the most outer one, which is EEG. So this thing is an EEG. You put it on the outside, so it doesn't actually go inside your skull at all. Clearly, it's on the outside of my head. So the signals it picks up are more limited because it's only the signals that are strong enough to pass through the skull and still not disappear, but it's more comfortable. And next level after this is ECOG, this thing right here, which means that you take off your skull, and I mean part of your skull, not the entire skull. And then inside there, on the surface of your brain, you put these electrodes which measure the action potential. So like as you remember, when neurons talk to each other, they do that by building up voltage and then sending a spike. And this voltage buildup and spike sending can be detected by these devices. And with that, we can know, oh, I'm using my motor cortex. I must be thinking about moving. Or, oh, I'm using my visual cortex. I must be imagining some visuals. And we can even, like with Meta's new research, we can even tell what image I am thinking of. Like we can even tell, am I thinking of an image of a horse or an image of a dog, and that kind of things. So we are getting to the level of accuracy where we can even detect exactly what words or what images I am thinking of. It used to be not that good. It used to be just I can tell whether or not I am thinking of an image at all, but now we can basically tell what you're thinking of. And if you think about it, this means that we're progressing to the level where, in theory, in a couple of years, it should be possible that if you wear a device while sleeping, you should be able to record your dream entirely and then literally watch it as a movie when you wake up. That's a fun use for it, but there's also therapeutic uses. All right, so the kind of devices we have are EEG, which is non-invasive, it's on the outside, ECOG, which penetrates your skull but sits on the surface of your brain, so it's not that invasive. There's multi-electrode array, this thing, this square grid of spikes, not big spikes, they're small spikes, but they go inside your brain tissue, so they are more damaging, but they can record more accurately, and especially for some functions we do which are happening inside our brains. Like, in a sense, we are lucky that a lot of the interesting things to measure about a human are happening on the surface of our brain, but some important functions are happening deep inside. For example, fear and such emotions are happening in the amygdala, which is inside of our brain. So we can't really measure it with an EEG, but we can measure it with a multi-electrode array if we open up your head and put it in there. So here, from left to right, temporal resolution decreases, but it becomes more comfortable. Temporal resolution means basically what's our frame rate. Like I can detect something that's happening every millisecond, or can I only detect something that's happening across 1 second? Like the highest level of detail is single cell recording, which means that you would only listen to the activity of one neuron. But that would be very limiting because, as you remember, our brain has 85 billion neurons. So, I mean, the relevant part of our brain, to be fair, the brain hemispheres have 15 billion, but it's still a lot. Like you can't put 15 billion electrodes in there, so you'd be very limited in that case. So you might choose more invasive methods which only focus on one or two neurons if you need that level of accuracy, but then you don't get a big picture. Or you can instead get a big picture and in fact more safely, but then you don't get temporal accuracy, which means that you can't have quick signals. Like you can't detect a signal and react in a few milliseconds. It would be slower than that, but it's more comfortable. So there's different ways that we can measure this. Mostly, you can say that it falls into a few categories. Roughly speaking, there's a category where we measure electrical activity of our brain because of our neurons sending signals to each other. And there's a category where we measure blood flow in our brain. Now, what does that mean? Whichever brain area we are using more right now, like say our visual cortex, which is at the back of our head, if I'm imagining some visuals, I must be using this area more right now. And because of that, this area will require more oxygen to have energy to be working. And oxygen is carried by blood, of course. So there will be a blood flowing into this area. And there are devices that can detect this. And based on that, we can know that, oh, I must be using this area. Now, thing is, blood flow causes magnetic fields, which we can measure, and that's how we can know that, oh, I'm using this brain area right now, or I'm using that brain area. So basically, there are magnetic ways of, like, we measure blood flow, or we measure just magnetic fields in our brain, and there are electrical ways, which is when we just measure electrical activities of either individual neurons or groups of neurons that activate together. This will be more clear as we go through specific examples in a moment, so don't worry too much about details. But still, do interrupt me if you want to ask any questions. Okay, I'll proceed.
I still have one question about all of those.
Mhm.
I mean, what is the purpose of recording brain activity? I mean, yes, you can control and monitor it, but is it used for example, surgery or any other medical procedures?
Yeah. Thanks for asking. Yeah, it is used a lot. So basically, you could say one area is obviously in research, where neuroscientists are still to this day trying to figure out, like, oh, this person cannot speak. Let's analyze his brain to see if he's literally missing a brain area, or if there is an, let's say, below average or above average activity in some brain area. Or, oh, this person is depressed, or this person is in pain. Let's see which brain area lights up differently for this person compared to the average. And then we can figure out that, oh, it seems this brain area must be correlated to this mental illness. So, and which can be used to maybe predict earlier whether you're predisposed to some mental illness. That's one way it can be useful. Another way it's useful is if you have to do brain surgery, you need to first look at the patient. Like, say there has been a trauma, like maybe someone got a metal rod that hit his head, or maybe just someone hit his head to the wall. In these situations, you need to scan the brain to see which brain areas are damaged, which are active, which are doing fine, which are not doing fine, and you can do that by scanning the brain. Also, another thing is when we are discussing, for instance, PTSD, like let's say because of trauma, someone maybe cannot speak or cannot see or has some issue like this, we would see where in the brain the issue is, like maybe literally their visual is registered, but then it's not carried over. And this can help us identify where the problem is. And based on that, we might be able to more accurately give them the right medicine or right therapy or just right treatment. So that's one thing. Another thing, which, for example, Neuralink is using right now, is that for people who are quadriplegic, which means they can't move their hands and they can't move their legs, so basically neck down, they are paralyzed. For these people, they put a brain chip in the motor cortex. Motor cortex is the part of our brain from which we give orders to move our body. And for people who are paralyzed, this area still works. It's just that when they send a signal, it doesn't reach their hands or legs because somewhere here there is a cut. So what Neuralink did instead is they capture the signals in the motor cortex and they convert that into keyboard commands or mouse commands. And so based on that, these people telepathically control a computer and they're still able to communicate even faster than regular individuals. Like they can type faster, they can basically convey information even faster. Some treatments also, these are very experimental for now, but some universities in China also did a brain-spine interface. So basically, when someone is paralyzed, they're not able to move because even though their brain produces the command to lift your arm or lift your leg, the signal from your brain has to pass through your spinal cord, has to go through all the way here and then reach your arm or wherever you're sending it. But usually, if you're paralyzed, that means somewhere here, basically the cord is cut and signal is not arriving. So sometimes what they do is they put one device here, which will measure these commands that you are intending to send. And then they put another device, like maybe right at your hand or at your legs, and that device will send out the commands that you were planning to send. And this way, some people restored their ability to walk. Some people restored their ability to use their hands. So this is still experimental, but the idea is that you can either restore your own limbs, or at least you can attach a prosthetic robot limb, like if you lost your hand, your arm, I mean entirely, like you could attach a robotic arm and control that telepathically. So the idea is you can either control limbs with that, your or prosthetic. You can control computers with that. We can find out which brain areas are damaged in a certain patient to know which brain areas are correlated for which brain functions, which can then also help us predict if some person is predisposed to a disease, and we can tell them avoid this and avoid that activity and so on. We can also more accurately know maybe what medicine to give a person. And these are just tip of the icebergs, because mostly also lot of neuroscience is still under research. We're still learning new things. Like one strange new thing that we are still experimenting with is, we'll get into this in a moment, but it's called transcranial direct current stimulation, which is that instead of trying to read the signals from the brain, we basically try to write to the brain. What this means is that, for example, some people try to send a correct kind of electrical signal in their brain to make them focus or make them learn faster. So US military is trying to make this efficient and productive to basically, for example, train their airplane pilots faster. The idea is maybe we can scan the brain of an experienced pilot while he's driving a plane, figure out which brain areas are used and in what way. And then when a beginner pilot is training, if we stimulate the same brain areas in this beginner pilot, maybe he will learn faster. That's the idea that they are experimenting with. They say it's somewhat successful, but it still needs work. So the idea is we can use this to learn faster, regulate emotions like trauma, chronic pains, and such. Just use telepathy for communication or for controlling limbs or prosthetics, and even do some kind of strange augmentations that I'll briefly mention. But yeah, basically, the frontier of what can be done is still expanding, but it includes both medical uses and augmentation uses. Did I answer your question?
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, let's get into specific examples now. So I again want to talk a little bit more about Neuralink specifically, just because it's the most popular brain chip company right now in the world. So they have this chip which is made of these parts. They plant this in the brain of a person in the motor cortex. Like, let me just talk about this for a second. So basically, we have a motor cortex right here, and what it does is it's a place from which we send out the commands to move our fingers or move our mouth to speak and everything. And they put this chip in there for paralyzed people. And this chip picks up on these signals and converts them into keyboard commands, pretty much. So the way they do it is they use a robot to drill the skull of a person a little bit, make a hole. Then in that hole, they drill the brain tissue as well a little bit, and then they insert this thing. And this thing is made of like 1,000 little electrodes, which measure a few neurons. And yeah, the whole thing then goes into some kind of machine learning AI program to translate these commands into what I want to type on a keyboard. For now, they have 12 patients. A lot more are on the way. Right, so as I was saying, Neuralink currently helps paralyzed people to communicate faster by using telepathy to type and just use the computer. They even game better than regular people. Not regular people, like non-paralyzed people. And yeah, 12 people have this device currently, 10,000 are on the way. But this is just generation one, it's very weak. They promise their second generation version of this chip, which will be available next year, will be 10 times better and then better and better until eventually it maybe maps to the entire brain and will look kind of strange like a cyborg. But yeah, this is one technology that exists. In fact, another thing that Neuralink is currently creating is Project Blind Sight, which is that for blind people who cannot see at all, like generally, if a person is blind, it's either because the eye is not working or signal is not being sent to the visual cortex. So how vision works in general, light hits your retina, then it gets focused on the photoreceptors in your eye. The photoreceptors are basically specific kind of neurons in your eye which receive light and spike based on light. Then this signal travels all the way in your brain through the optic nerve. It goes to thalamus and then keeps going and goes into your visual cortex. Then in your visual cortex, it's processed and you make sense of the basically pixels. And you realize, oh, I'm looking at a dog, or oh, I'm looking at my friend, and so on. And so for blind people, it's usually the case that either the eye is not working or the optic nerve is not working. But either way, pretty much the problem is that the visual information is not arriving at the visual cortex. So the way Neuralink's project Blindsight wants to fix that is by having a device that directly sends these electrical signals to your visual cortex. So basically like artificial eyes, but not just eyes. It also replaces the optic link on the inside. The way they do it is sort of like there will be a camera. This camera will measure light just as normal cameras do. And then it will convert this light into the correct type of electrical activity that your visual cortex must receive to understand the images. And they say that at first this will be like black and white, not very good. And then over time, the resolution will go up. They will have color vision. And then they could even extend it more than what we can see. So, for example, there are many kinds of lights in this world, but we only see a small part of it. For example, we can't see infrared light or ultraviolet light or X-rays or so on. But people who have this kind of artificial vision could be made to see any sort of light, like infrared, ultraviolet, or whatever they want. So this kind of strange augmentation applications are coming along the way. But yeah, for now, this technology is still for recovery first and not really yet augmentation.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Do you know of any articles regarding this information?
Yeah. I'll share it in Discord after this meeting, a bunch of articles. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, sure thing. Yeah. I'll share all the Neuralink details and similar ones. Yeah. Okay, now just to cover one more time. So there's different levels of invasiveness, meaning how much deeply into your brain we drill down, basically. So non-invasive is anything that doesn't require surgery, like just this. You put it on, take it off. Semi-invasive is when we drill into your skull, but we are on the surface of your brain. For example, it's called ECOG, electrocorticography. And then invasive is when we go inside your brain tissue. Like Neuralink is invasive, it goes inside the brain. Yeah, generally, of course, less invasive, the better, because more comfortable, less risk of infection or whatever, easier to remove if you don't want it anymore. And yeah, just doesn't require as much legal approval. But more invasive means more direct, like closer to the actual source of signal. So less noise, less problem.
So if it's invasive, it must go into the brain, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it must go at least on, yeah, sometimes inside your brain tissue, but sometimes, like in this case, like this is ECOG on the picture, this goes on the surface of your brain, but it still has to drill through your skull to get there.
Okay.
So yeah, this is semi-invasive because like it's kind of invasive, yeah, but fully invasive is when you, even here, if you were to cut some of your brain tissue to put something in there, that's fully invasive. And like Neuralink is fully invasive. Yeah, so this is an example of ECOG. Like here, M is motor cortex, S is sensory cortex. Basically means that roughly here is where we give out commands to move our body, and roughly here is where we feel touch across our body. So by putting a device across that, we can record it and potentially also stimulate it. So what I mean by stimulate is, for example, I'll see if I can find the video for this, but there is one person who is paralyzed, but he's controlling a robot arm telepathically, using this robot arm to eat or to drink and such. And he also actually feels the touch on this robot arm. Like if someone shakes the robot arm's hand, he feels it. And this is possible because generally the way we feel touch is on our skin, like suppose on my finger. Under my skin, there are sensory neurons, which means that some neurons which basically get excited and spike when they touch something. And this spike then travels across my arm to my spinal cord and then goes all the way up to my brain in this sensory cortex right here, this S. And in there, it's registered. And then I know that, oh, I had something touching on my hand. So I don't actually feel touch on my hand. Technically, I feel it in my brain. It's just that the brain knows that it came from here. So similarly, that guy who is using a robot arm and not a biological arm actually feels the touch on the robot arm, same as how we feel it, because the signal is sent to his sensory cortex. I'll try to find the video of that guy. But yeah, basically, by mapping to the things that exist on the surface, ECOG allows us to only semi-invasively still do very interesting things. And this is more preferable than fully invasive because, well, obviously it's still easier to take off, still less risk, and you're not actually destroying any brain tissue. For fully invasive stuff, you have to destroy some of the brain because otherwise you can't drill down there. So it's, yeah, not as good. So this is ECOG. And precisely what it does is, let's look at this example. So what exactly is between like your scalp, which is the outside of your head, to your brain? So between them is, first of all, there's of course the scalp, which is just skin. Inside that skin, then you have a bone, which is the skull, of course. And then under the skull, there is still something between the skull and the brain, a kind of cushion, so that anytime you hit your head even slightly on something, you don't get brain damage. And this cushion is called the meninges. And it is made of these three tissues. One is the dura mater, another is the arachnoid mater, and then another is the pia mater. So don't worry about memorizing this right now. I just briefly expose them to you. So basically, these three tissues are like a pillow between your brain and your skull to make sure that they absorb the shock and your brain doesn't get damaged from slight bumps and such. And so for ECOG, you have to drill here. You have to drill through the skull, you have to drill through the dura mater, and usually ECOG stops somewhere around the arachnoid mater and pia mater, somewhere around here. You don't have to all the way go to the brain. But for Neuralink kind of fully invasive things, you have to go inside the brain and there's more damage that way. Is this clear?
I have one question. What is this thing called between arachnoid and pia mater?
This is just called subarachnoid space. And yeah, basically, yeah, it's called subarachnoid space, and it's called arachnoid because it means spider and it kind of looks like spider's web. But yeah, basically these are three kinds of matter. Like dura matter is more hard, arachnoid matter is a little bit less hard, and pia matter is even softer. So it gets progressively softer. So like very hard skull and slightly less hard dura matter, slightly less hard arachnoid matter, then even less hard pia matter, and then finally we have a brain. So all of this exists pretty much to protect our brain from shock, from trauma.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, there is one more brain-computer interface company, which I think deserves some attention. They're called Synchron. They're kind of similar to Neuralink in that they also try to measure the activity of your motor cortex and based on that allow paralyzed people to use a phone or use a computer. But they do it a little bit differently. So I will show you their video in a bit, but first just verbally to explain. So the way Neuralink does it is they drill your skull, then they drill through all of these layers and they go inside your brain and they put the chip there, which destroys a lot of your brain matter and is somewhat potentially dangerous. Although so far the 12 people they tested on are completely fine, but I mean, it's just 12 people. Synchron has a different way, which is that they are trying to use the jugular vein, I believe. So basically, the brain obviously needs a supply of blood because blood carries oxygen and cells need oxygen to have energy. And so what they do is somewhere around here, they inject their device into your vein, into your artery, and it goes up. And once it visits your brain, it stays stuck there. And there, from your arteries, it connects to your motor cortex, and that's how it records you. So this is less dangerous and yeah, potentially less capable than Neuralink in the long run, but it's safer. Let me just show you what this means. Do you see the screen?
Yeah.
Just 1 second.
Body can result in disability. Spinal cord injury, stroke, limb amputation, and motor neuron disease, or ALS, may all cause paralysis, or even loss of the ability to speak. The stentrode is a neural interface designed to overcome paralysis by creating a digital bypass from brain to assistive device. An investigational device, the stentrode is inserted via a catheter into the jugular vein and maneuvered into the brain without the need for open brain surgery. The sensors are built onto a self-expanding stent that engages into the wall of the vein and which is designed to maintain blood flow. Over time, cells may gradually grow over the sensors and incorporate them into the tissue. The sensors are placed immediately adjacent to the control center in the brain, known as the motor cortex. The patient may be paralyzed, but their motor control center can still be activated simply by thinking. The system is designed to transmit these brain signals out of the brain, out of the vein, and into a unit implanted under the skin in the chest. This unit is programmed to pick up brain signals continuously. The command center in the brain is now directly connected to software, and the patient would attempt to train their brain for direct operating system control by thinking. Direct brain control of a mouse, a keyboard, exoskeletons, and even vehicles may become possible. Technology to restore independence. Synchron's neural interface technology, enabling people. A few months ago, I surrendered.
So, yeah, that's the idea. By the way, can you hear me right now?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's the idea with Synchron, is that they're trying to do something very similar to Neuralink, but in a possibly safer way by taking you through the jugular vein and then bringing the same electrodes right next to the motor cortex that then go through the vein, then they diffuse, they connect to the motor cortex, and then send out the signal to a small device that it will be having here. Now, as you might imagine, this can be very uncomfortable thing to agree to normally, but this is for paralyzed people who are willing to go to more risks just to restore their communication ability or even movement potentially. So this is what Synchron does.
Some can.
Now let's move back to our presentation because there's a couple others that I want to cover as well. Again, if you have questions at any moment, interrupt me. And yeah, let's continue. So, fMRI is another interesting tool. fMRI is a giant machine, by the way. Let me just show you what it looks like. So this is MRI machine. Hospitals have it typically only because it costs like $1 million, maybe even more. And the way it works is that a patient lies down, goes inside there, and it measures the magnetic fields of your brain. The way it does this is that, as we mentioned before, depending on which brain areas you use, blood flows to those areas, and blood contains iron, which causes the magnetic fields to activate. And so from that, the MRI machine can image your brain basically because it can understand how in 3D your brain looks, which of it is active. And then we can use that to figure out like, oh, a part of your brain is too active or too passive. Something's wrong with you. And for instance, some of the interesting findings that come from this kind of studies is that one thing we discovered, for instance, is that we have a special brain area just for face recognition. It's called fusiform face area, and people who get damage in that area can still recognize objects. They can still recognize colors. They can still know that they're looking at a keyboard or at a computer or whatever, but they cannot recognize faces. So they don't know who they're talking to. I mean, they can know from the voice, but they can't recognize a person by their face, even though they can intuitively know that they're talking to a person. Like we have very specialized brain regions. We have even brain regions for thinking about objects, for thinking about scenes, for thinking about other people's thoughts even. We have a brain area for that as well. And sometimes if a part of your brain, a specific area of your brain gets damaged, sometimes it's possible that other brain areas can over time learn to do the same function, so it will be restored. But sometimes that's not possible, sadly, and so in those cases, you just lose that ability. So for example, two very important brain areas. We have our Broca's area and Wernicke's area, which together are for speech. So typical understanding used to be that Broca's area is where we produce speech, like doesn't matter, I mean, produce language more generally, because even if, regardless if you want to say words or if you want to write words, we basically decide them in Broca's area, and we understand the language, like regardless if it's reading or hearing, in Wernicke's area. And so if you get damage in those areas, your ability to speak or to write or your ability to hear or understand become compromised. And brain imaging allows us to study this phenomena and also allows us to see if there are solutions maybe. So this is, and again, fMRI is just one of the methods used in brain imaging. It's very detailed, very 3D. You can even get inside deep brain structures. So in that sense, it's good. But its downsides are first that it's very expensive to build. I mean, you can't really have one at home because it costs more than $1 million. And second downside is that it's slow. So because it measures magnetic fields from blood flow, blood has to go to your brain area and then we can measure it. And blood takes some time to go there, so we can't really use it for instantaneous things. Like for example, an EEG or device like this can be used to control a robot hand, because robot hand needs a delay of a few hundred milliseconds at best, so that I can still basically adjust it midair. Like I can, while it's moving, I can tell it, no, don't go any faster or don't go any slower. But fMRI would be useless for that because it will take a while for fMRI to realize my new signal. So for controlling stuff, fMRI is useless, but for scanning the brain, understanding what disease a person might have and such, fMRI is very useful, and clinics mostly use fMRI, not other techniques. Is this understandable?
Yes.
Okay. So another new method that's emerging is called ultrasound. So ultrasound is generally popular from seeing the babies in the womb. So like when pregnant women want to have a look at their child, they use ultrasound screening to see their child. And the same ultrasound, it turns out, can be used to either see any part of a brain or even affect any part of a brain. Like regardless of if it's on the surface of a brain or deep brain, like inside. And ultrasound is non-invasive. It's kind of like headphones, which is what makes them more attractive option. But they are underexplored for now. We don't know yet how well they will work, but there is a company that is trying to do that. So this kind of mappings can be made with ultrasound. And there's this company called Nudge, which is founded by, not founded, but like led by this Bliss Chapman guy who used to be one of the lead programmers in Neuralink. And Nudge's purpose is that they are trying to make this kind of device that will eventually look like headphones. Right now it looks like this, which a person will put on their head. And using ultrasound, it will figure out exactly your brain activity and then adjust it. And they say this, they promise that in like 5 years, with this technology, it should be possible to cure chronic pains or even PTSD, depression, and these kind of things by just directly affecting your brain activity. So these are kind of works that are on their way. Some of them are emotional, let's say, adjustments. Some of them are to remove pain. Some of them are to give you ability to control devices and things. So some of them are to learn faster or focus better. So all kinds of edits into what's going on in our brain are becoming possible. And we are at the beginning of it, really. So technically, brain technologies have existed for about a century now.
but they're picking up the pace now, especially because AI is allowing us to finally start to make sense of these signals in such a way that we can map them to commands or whatever we want to do. And so, yeah, I will send out little details and posts and such in Discord about each of these companies that we're discussing. Yeah, let's move on. So Nudge is using ultrasound to image the brain and then affect the brain to remove pains or depressions or anxieties and such, which could be dystopian in the sense of like someone could control your emotions with it in theory. I mean, they're not planning anything evil with it, but yeah. These are double.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
I read this article about scientists discovering this new helmet, which is targeting neurons. And this helmet helps patients to help with schizophrenia or PTSD. I mean, what's the difference between this helmet and this nudge that you talked about?
Not necessarily any difference. Like, I'm not sure what that specific helmet is using. In fact, it might even have been, the article might have been about this one actually, for all I know. But there's basically multiple ways to do it. And depending on the method you use, some diseases might be treated more easily, some might be treated harder. So one method that's used in treatment sometimes is transcranial direct current stimulation, which is basically that somewhere on the surface of your brain you just hit a jolt of electricity, kind of like electroshock therapy, but it doesn't need to be painful. And sometimes for certain types of problems, even like for focus problems or such, that can help. So depending on a specific disease and the way you're handling it, multiple ways, different techniques could be equivalent. But Nudge specifically, why they're unique, you could say, is because they are aiming to make this consumer grade. Like they want this to eventually cost like around $1,000 so that any person who really needs it can just buy it and have it at home and then just put on a headphone whenever they want and get rid of the pain so that you wouldn't have to visit the clinic and have a doctor set it up and such. So basically these people specifically are trying to make it very accessible and very easy to use so that you don't need professionals. So I'm not sure about the exact post you read about a helmet. It could be something similar to this. It could be the transcranial direct current stimulation, or it could just be some kind of neurofeedback device.
If you want, I will send you the
Yeah,
link.
I want you to actually send it. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I'll just continue with other things. Oh yeah, I also want to mention EMGs. So everything we discussed so far was measuring activity in your brain, but technically our nervous system is not just the brain. So as you remember, we have central nervous system, which is brain plus the spinal cord that go through our spine. And we also have peripheral nervous system, which is basically our arms, our legs, and everything other than this. So EMGs, what they do is every time we have an intention to move, like when I try to move my arm or whatever, what we are doing is we are sending an electrical signal that has to travel through here, and then it has to reach the muscle that I want to move. And this electrical signal can be measured while it's traveling. And this is what EMGs do. EMG stands for electromyography. And basically you put electrodes on someone's hands or legs or maybe even diaphragm if you want to measure breathing. And you measure the electrical activity that is being sent to this muscle. So in a sense, this is equivalent to measuring the motor cortex, but it's much easier and doesn't have to be as invasive. It can be a little bit invasive, like you can use needles to make it more accurate, but it doesn't even have to be that way. You could measure it completely from the outside. So EMGs are a very promising field as well because one, they are more comfortable, and two, they are easier to make sense of non-invasively. So non-invasively, if you want to quickly measure what movements you're intending to make, maybe for a device or something, you would use an EMG or an EEG, possibly a combination. But yeah, those are basically competing approaches. Yeah, just this. And one thing to keep in mind here is that it's not always clear which way is better. It might simply come down to one way was implemented by a good company and another way was not implemented by a good company, and so this way exists and that way doesn't exist yet. So for example, Meta recently announced their new generation of smart glasses, which come with an EMG bracelet. So basically, they want to replace smartphones. So like right now, if I want to do something, the process is I have to pick up my phone from my pocket. I have to, I don't know, scroll through it or click on it, write the password, whatever, then click on what I want to do, then put it on my ear to listen if I'm calling. So this is a process that they want to improve on. And basically what they want to do is they want to have you wear smart glasses where display and noise and everything is already there. And when you want to do controls, you will be wearing a smart bracelet and you'll you'll be wearing a smart bracelet and you will very briefly be moving your hand like this. And from those hand movements, or not even movements, but thoughts about hand movements, this EMG device will pick up those signals, and then your glasses will maybe scroll, maybe type something, or whatever you want to do. I'll send a video of that actually. Meta already presented that. They're already selling it for like $800. So the idea is they want to replace smartphones, make it more comfortable. I suspect it's actually not more comfortable just yet, but it will be in like, I don't know, 2 years maybe, something like that. I don't know. It's hard to guess these things, but eventually for sure smartphones will be replaced by some kind of neural device which lets you not have to use your hands to type. So these are being explored. EMGs are also being explored like right now, for example, for breathing assistance. So for instance, when some people go into clinics and they have to get connected to assisted breathing, the device which pumps oxygen into you has to know the right pressure, because if pressure is too low, you're not getting enough air and you will suffocate. If the pressure is too much, your lung might burst and so you might die. And so the pressure has to be at the right amount. And sometimes the pressure is not at the right amount, and so there are fatalities. And so some people are working on using EMGs, like if we were to put an EMG on a diaphragm of a patient, then we could know how hard they're breathing based on how much signal to contract the diaphragm is receiving, and based on that adjust how much pressure we are supplying through the tube. So this is still experimental work, but it's a work in progress. And so basically there are a lot of applications for these things. And if you think about it, it makes sense that there's a lot of applications because everything we humans do is essentially about our brain sending neural data to our muscles. That's how we do everything. That's how we speak, how we draw, how we move, how we write. Everything that we do has to do with using our brain to instruct our muscles. So interfering in that process allows us to upgrade on that. Maybe give us extra limbs, maybe help us live healthier, maybe be faster, be smarter, be more self-controlling, and so on. And so this is just ways to augment or recover human capabilities. In fact, right now I'm involved in a research on EMGs for assisted breathing. And yeah, it's a living field that's progressing right now. I mean, all of this neurotech, so to speak, is a living, very young field that's progressing right now. Pretty much it's being boosted by rise of AI. So this rise of AI is actually helping science a lot, because whatever would take maybe 10 years before can maybe take 2 years or 1 year now, and it's accelerating even more. Potentially we might get to the level where it could completely replace even human scientists. We're not there yet, it's still a couple of years away from that, but it's still accelerating a lot. So yeah, these are EMGs. The way they work is, yeah, they place electrodes in a couple places on your arm or your leg or whatever. They might use a needle, they don't have to, but it's possible. And yeah, they basically check your muscle activity, your nerve activity, they correlate it, and then you can use it to control devices or like prosthetics, or for someone who has maybe shaking hands or some other problem, this can be used along with some neurofeedback phenomenon to basically make you healthier, make you recover your ability to move your hands or legs normally. So I'm just dumping a lot of information on you right now because there's many different kinds I want to cover. I will cover materials of it as well. And also, if you get some questions later, you can ask either in the chat or on tomorrow's meeting. So tomorrow's meeting will basically build on everything we said today, but we will actually use this device in code in Python to see what we can do. Like I will put it on and we'll see what we can do tomorrow. All right, so finally, let's go into EEGs in detail. So these things, what they are, exactly how they work. I already mentioned that they measure electricity, but let's get into what I mean by that and how. So first of all, remember, neurons send electrical signals. When they spike through the axon, electrical signal goes. And then at the end of the axon, neurotransmitters are released and so on and so on. But these electrical signals can be detected. So EEG is called an electroencephalogram. Don't worry too much, but it basically means measuring electricity. We put it on top of our head, like this. And we measured several areas of our brain. So we have standards of naming these brain areas. You can see the naming scheme right here. So basically, as you recall, this area of the brain is the frontal lobe. This area is parietal lobe. This is temporal lobe, and this is occipital lobe on the back of our head. And so here on our EEG, we mark each section with a name based on where on our head it goes. Like, as you can notice, this thing has a couple of these electrodes, and each of them is supposed to go in a specific place. Like these ones are at the back of the head, so they are meant to go on occipital cortex. So they will have a number like 05 or something like that. The forward ones will have numbers like F3, F1 and such. And now let's briefly explain what these numberings mean. So F stands for frontal, T for temporal, so like around your temple, like here around your ears. C just means central, like just center of your head. P is parietal, so upper back of your head, and O is occipital. O is not on this picture, but yeah, you get the idea. And then these numbers. So Z means it's on the midline of your head, like on the center of your, this is Z. So FZ is the center of your forehead. CZ is like center of your top of your head. PZ is here, OZ is here, and so on. And then left side of our brain has odd numbers, the right side of our brain has even numbers. Like here will be F3, here will be F4, then here will be F5, here will be F6, and so on. So farther away from the midline it is, the bigger number it gets. So this is on the picture, you can see this is C4, this is T8, C3, T9, CZ, PZ, and so on. Like every device comes with names for each of the sections where they have. So these are, each one of them are called channels because, well, it's a channel means basically where am I measuring this. So like this one has 8 channels because, yeah, 2, 4, 6, sorry, 2, 4, 5. This has 10 channels. I just gave you misinformation. Yeah, so this thing has 10 channels. Different devices might have 200 channels, 256 channels, 20 channels, 2 channels. But basic idea is the more channels you have, the more resolution you have. So that's better in a sense because you get more signal. But then you also have to struggle more in your code to actually understand the complete signal. So in some way you might be over-engineering. But yeah, let's briefly move on. So this device is called the Neurosity Crown. It's a type of EEG made by a company called Neurosity. They're an American company. And this device allows you to have focus, calmness, raw brain waves, and movement commands. So this means that you can measure, am I relaxed or am I nervous? Am I calm or am I excited? Raw brainwave activity if I then want to correlate it myself with some machine learning code. And movement commands. So am I thinking of moving my right hand? Am I thinking of moving my left hand? Am I thinking of moving my leg? Am I thinking of moving my pinky? And that kind of things can be measured with this device. Now, very briefly, how this works is that our neurons send signals at different rates. Like if one neuron sends 10 signals per second, that is 10 hertz. If it sends 100 signals per second, that's 100 hertz, and so on. Typically, our waking brain is at beta wave, so from 12 to 30 hertz activity. At high activity, we go from 30 to 100, and in sleep and coma, we go even lower. We can tell how alert we are by saying how much beta waves versus how many alpha waves we have right now in our brain. We can use this for focus and calmness measurements. And if we have many gamma waves, that means we are very focused right now. So that's the kind of things. Or lower ones means we are very relaxed right now. So this is used for theta to beta ratio. So how much theta waves, how much beta waves is how focused we are. And then there is a phenomenon of neurofeedback. I believe our meeting is about to end. Let's rejoin, and I will explain neurofeedback in a moment. So just one last thing I wanted to cover, like we will get into details of exactly how the NeuroStick works tomorrow, because tomorrow we'll be actually using it. The basic idea is we have a lot of neurons in our brain, and when many of them fire at the same time, the total signal is strong enough to penetrate the skull, and we can measure it. And these total signals are picked up by these electrodes, like these ones. And then we
I have a
send it.
question.
Yeah.
Is this the one that you showed us earlier?
Yeah, it's this thing. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, so basically this, yes, takes signals of your brain and then through Bluetooth or through Wi-Fi sends it over to you, this specific device. Yeah. I mean, sends it over to your computer, which you can then analyze or do whatever you want with. We'll get into what to do with them tomorrow. But for now, just one more thing I want to cover is neurofeedback. Neurofeedback is this strange phenomenon where a person can be made to learn to control some process happening in his head if he's shown a correlate of it either on the screen or in the form of sounds. So, for example, we don't directly control our level of focus, but if some device measures our level of focus and displays it on the screen, like simplest way would be to just have a like progress bar that has 0% or 100%, and depending on how focused I am, the progress bar will keep going up or down. If I see that, and then I try to adjust the progress bar directly by thinking about, let's raise the progress bar. In a bit, my brain figures out how to do whatever it takes inside my head to move this progress bar up or down. And because of that, I become able to regulate my focus level. So this is basically what neurofeedback allows. It's being explored for focus, for relaxation, for even feeling less pain in cases of chronic pain. So for any brain phenomenon that you can measure and display on screen as some kind of progress bar, you can then gamify it, so to speak, so that you can train by trying to change the value on the screen just intuitively. And you intuitively develop the ability to, do it, which means that you develop the ability to affect whatever was causing that. So you develop the ability to shift into high focus or to feel less pain or something like that. And this is used a lot in trauma treatment and also is being explored for literally just treating ADHD or treating focus issues and such. So this phenomenon is called neurofeedback because you receive feedback in the sense that like you are looking at basically your behavior and then you're affecting what you're looking at, because if your focus goes up, you will see it on the screen. If your focus goes down, you will see it on the screen. So you learn how to regulate your focus. In fact, specifically for focus, I have this, let me just show you. I'll send this video in a chat, but basically gamified version of that, where using this Neurostic crown, what I did was I created a kind of game. It needs work, like it's not actually ready to treat a real person, but basically a game where if you stay focused, new trees will grow, and if you lose your focus, the trees will shrink. And the idea is if you play it enough, you will develop the ability to instantly control your focus, which can help with just work, studies, or just generally in life to not be more distracted than you would wish to be. So I'll send all the relevant links for this. But yeah, the idea is this is again underexplored. A lot of neuroscience is still being explored right now. So we don't really know what the limitations are. We just know that a lot of things are possible. Any questions about neurofeedback?
No, it's all good.
Okay, good. And so just last thing I wanted to mention again is brain stimulation. So I briefly mentioned this before. This is called transcranial direct current stimulation, which is a fancy way of saying electroshock therapy. So basically you electrocute yourself at correct places with correct voltages, and this can affect your brain structure such that maybe you focus better, learn faster, treat trauma, or do something with it. Now, this is a very beginner level attempt at treating a brain as both a reading device and an output device, like both as an input device and an output device. So right now, every method we discussed was pretty much about reading brain data, but this also allows us to write to brain data. In theory, what people are hoping is that eventually this kind of technology should allow us to, for example, directly write knowledge into our brains. So for instance, maybe one person learns physics very well, and then you can download this person's knowledge into your brain. Or you can download the knowledge of boxing or knowledge of kung fu or knowledge of how to speak Chinese. Or even not knowledge, but like experience. It is theorized that it should be possible because it has been attempted on a very small scale between two mouse brains, and we know it's in theory possible that I should be able to send you my memories. It's like if you ask your friend, hey, what was happening yesterday? And he'll go, oh, wait, I'll show you. And you'll just go and directly see the experience straight from that person's point of view, like what that person felt, what the person saw, what the person heard, smelled, everything. Like we could directly send memories like that. This is kind of explored in a game and show Cyberpunk. So like if you're interested, I recommend you watch that. But yeah, basically you would be able to send memories, send knowledge, very much accelerate your communication speed and learning rate, and just otherwise augment yourself beyond what's considered, let's say, normal or typical right now. In fact, Neuralink, which I mentioned before, which is an Elon Musk brain chip company, which has those chips for paralyzed people to help them communicate and are now working on curing blindness. They claim that their ultimate goal is human AI symbiosis. So what they mean is they want to build a very high bandwidth channel between the human and the machine. High bandwidth means you communicate a lot. So right now, when I am speaking to you, I am giving you information at roughly 40 bits per second. But even slow Wi-Fi can do 50,000 times better than that. So machines are much faster than us. Like if you throw a book's PDF at ChatGPT, it can answer any question about that book in like a few seconds. But a human would take like maybe a week to read the book. And similarly, the idea is we are very slow at both learning things and at conveying the things that we know. And Neuralink promises to speed up both. First, by speeding up our communication speed, and then maybe by also speeding up learning speed. So these kind of augmentations are being attempted, and we will see a lot of strange things come from there in the future. But yeah, for now, for today, to be clear, neurotech is basically about helping paralyzed or otherwise impaired people to recover their regular functionality. But we are starting to cross into the territory of augmentations. And to be honest, I am personally very interested in augmentations, but yeah, it's a controversial thing. Like some people are not very comfortable with it. I understand that, but I think it's natural and normal. And I think that by like 1 or 2 generations, almost every human will be in some way mentally augmented. That's what I suspect anyway. In fact, it might get to the level where the gap of intelligence between a normal person and an augmented person might be as big as a gap of intelligence between like apes and humans, just because of how many additions we can do, how much more perfect memory such an augmented person can have, how much more direct connection to an AI or some machines of such person can have, and so on. And yeah, it could allow also a higher level of self-control and just strange things. And when I say strange things, I mean very strange things. Like, for example, we could expand our conscious understanding. Like, for example, right now, our conscious subjective experiences are like, for example, that I might see color, I might hear sounds, I might feel touch, I might feel smell or taste or so on, right? Some people already do a new strange thing, which is that they add a new sense to their bodies, a sense of magnetic fields. So what they do is they cut their finger, they put a magnet in their finger, and then they patch the finger. And this magnet touches the nerve in the finger. And so every time this person goes through next to a wall or something where there's electricity, so basically always, this magnet moves a little. And at first, the brain just interprets that as touch, no idea behind it. But after a few days, the brain adapts, and then such a person knows like where in the walls the power lines are, where the electricity flows, what kind of metals are in the room, uh, what devices are charging and how well, how much power each thing has, and this kind of things. So basically sensory augmentation, you kind of sense. Some people are also experimenting with being able to see infrared or other kinds of colors. Some people are experimenting with just expanding consciousness in some other forms. And so basically, we will see the emergence of ways to expand our minds, become smarter, become new kinds of consciousness. And this will go into strange new territories. But yeah, it will start with recovery and go into augmentation. That's a rough idea. Some people will choose a cyborg path. Some people will eventually go push this to a level where they will even essentially start to replace their neurons with artificial neurons until they have replaced their whole brain, at which point they become kind of like mind uploaded people. So they would live digitally, but still supposedly still have the same personality and feelings and consciousness and everything. We don't know for sure if it will work, but a lot of people are betting on it. And so, yeah, we'll be seeing a lot of strange things. Okay, that is it for our lecture for today. And do you have any questions?
No, but I just wanted to say something.
Mhm.
I will send you the link in about 30 or 40 minutes.
Yeah, sure, sounds good. And I will also send the links of things we talked about in Discord. And yeah, we'll have a second lecture tomorrow about actually using this device with Python. All
Okay.
right.
Thank you.
Yeah. See you
Bye.
tomorrow.